Welcome to the Data Friday. My name is Michael Schimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We run a session here every Friday, 11 o'clock Central European Standard Time, to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about Data Vault, data mining, data-driven applications, cloud computing, that sort of stuff. You can ask all kinds of questions here, in this realm, and use the chat here in the client, use the Q&A function in the client. You can also raise your hand. I'll give you a voice, and I'll show you a link to a form where you can essentially submit your questions as well, and then I pick them up from there. You can upload attachments and so on. So that's essentially what today's question taker has done. So if we receive multiple questions, I will be cherry picking. If we receive no question at all, I will talk about the cluster here. Haven't done much, so thanks for asking questions essentially and sending more questions in. And a good question should be, I should be able to answer within 10 minutes roughly for a good recording for online social media and that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's just jump in directly into the question. Okay, so this is about applying soft deletes in dimensions. And we know that, let's say you have customer records or product records, for example, and the idea is that a customer might get deleted in the source system, but in a data warehouse, we want to capture those deletes, those hard deletes in the source as soft deletes in the data warehouse, because we can't delete a customer, let's say a business key for customers, because you have historical descriptions in some satellite attached to the hash key of the business key. So if you would remove the business key and or the hash key, you essentially lose a parent for your descriptions. So we just can't delete data, except, well, that's sometimes we have to for GDPR reasons. When the lawyer comes in, we find a solution, but it's not today's topic essentially. So let me just read a question here. In your book and in your information delivery class, you shared an example of virtualized dimension DIM airport, and I'll show it in a second. This example, however, does not take into account status tracking effectivity satellites, which would normally be used to exclude deleted entries or at least flag them as inactive to the end user. How would this template be modified then? Would you create a status satellite for each and every source, attached indexing it in PIT as well? How, on the other hand, would purely virtualized dimension look like without PIT, just on top of the hub and satellite views? Okay, a couple of questions here. So first of all, yes, we have a satellite called the effectivity satellite or the status satellite, where we keep track of a flag. We would prefer a deletion timeline, a deletion date timestamp that indicates a record being deleted. So if the flag is true, deleted, or is active is false, or if the deleted date timeline, if that is not the end of all times anymore. In this case, we know the record has been removed. It's a satellite because it can switch back. So what if the end user realizes they accidentally deleted a customer inside the source system and then recreate a new customer record with the same business key, which means that the same business key shows up again, and we can easily capture this because if we treat this deletion flag or deletion timeline just as a descriptive attribute, it can jump back and forth. Today it's deleted, so the end of all the load date timestamp when you recognize the deletion would be used as the deletion timeline, and then if it shows up again, you set it back to end of all times, and then gets deleted again, and so on, right? So it can jump back and forth. Doesn't matter. We just keep track of the changes to the status of the row in the source system. Does it exist or not? That's the basic idea. So that's number one. It's just a standard satellite. Problem is, yes, we have to do this per source system because users can delete a customer record independently in each source system. They will actually do that, right? So for every source system, for every business key, we have to, or at least where the business key is relevant, we have to have a effectivity satellite. The effectivity satellite also contains the business timelines. Let's say the valid from two dates, maybe contract start, contract end date. You could also have a pattern where you only capture the deletion timeline and then make it multi-active. So instead of having one satellite per source system, we have one multi-active satellite where all the source systems are essentially added as multi-active records, essentially, right? So you have a group per business key, and then you keep track of the current state of the row in the source system as one row in the group, essentially. That's the basic idea. One row per source system. So there's some different variations how we can deal with this. All right, so that's number one. So, but you have to capture the deletion timeline or the deletion flag per source system and business key. That's the important piece. Now, so that should answer this one here. And yes, for the PIT table, so typically the standard recommendation is to add all these satellites to the PIT table that are relevant for information delivery. And that's certainly true for the effectivity satellites. So typically we add the effectivity satellites just as other satellites to the pit table. Remember, the effectivity satellite is not a special format. It's just a standard satellite. We just separate the timelines, the business timelines, into their own satellite, including the deletion timeline. So it's just a standard satellite, add them to the pit table, you're done. That's a standard pattern for satellites, right? You might exclude some satellites from the pit table if you don't need them for information delivery. But this satellite you certainly need. And then, and once you have the effectivity satellites in the pit table, then you can essentially calculate a is active flag or decide on the existence of the customer record in the dimension. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of filtering out deleted customers from the source system. So when a customer gets deleted in a source, sometimes we remove them from the dimension. I find this odd because you still have transactions in the fact entities that refer to the customers. So in my opinion, you can't remove the customers just because they're deleted, because that affects the facts, and the facts are still there, right? They still made revenues in the past and so on. So my opinion is I would not delete a customer record from the dimension just because they have been removed from the source system. Instead, I would tag them, as you said here as well, as I would flag them as inactive with a field. So I would calculate, I would prefer personally, right? That's my personal opinion. If customers want it this way, fine. But I would personally prefer to calculate an inactive field, maybe a Boolean field. And again, remember this field can also switch back and forth, right? So, and this is easy. Once you have the effectivity satellite in the pit table, you can just have in your dimension view a calculation. So you join the effectivity satellite using an inner join, equi-join condition into the satellite, and then retrieve the deletion timeline. And if it's end of all times, it's not active anymore. If it's if it's end of all times, it's active. If it's not end of all times, then it's not active anymore. It's currently deleted. And that's it, essentially. And if you want to filter out these records, if that's what you want or what the users want, in this case, you just apply an where condition where the deletion timeline is end of all times. That's the active row, so we don't filter them. Where it's not end of all times, that's what you want to filter out, essentially. So relatively easy because you're just adding the effectivity satellites to the pit table, and it's available. It gets more complicated in all honesty, because when do you consider a customer as being deleted? When the customer is coming from multiple source systems and they can delete the customer record in multiple source systems independently from each other, right? So you might come up with a leading system for your dimension. What's the leading system for the customer records or for this deletion flag or is active flag? Might be your CRM system or something, right? I had cases where the customer said, the client, the user said, if a customer is removed from the leading system, we consider it for this report as being deleted. Or a combination of multiple systems, right? The customer must be removed from those two systems. The rest, we don't care. Or I had the rule where the customer is removed from all the systems, but it never happened, right? So that's what it is. But I've seen all these rules. And it gets more complicated because some source systems, they also allow you a soft delete in a source, like SAP and Salesforce and so on. I'm not sure about SAP, but Salesforce allows it. And so we have an is deleted flag in the source system. So when you remove the record in Salesforce, it ends up in a trash bin, just like on your laptop or something, or on your operation systems. And only when you clear the trash bin, then the record gets physically deleted. So when do you consider a customer as being deleted? If it's still in the trash bin, is that a deleted customer record? Or only when you really remove them physically from the system by cleaning up the trash bin? I'm out. That's a business rule. Ask your business users. They have to decide on that when they consider a customer as being deleted. And that rule, because you have all the effectivity satellites attached to the pit table, all the data is available now to make that decision, right? So the where condition or the calculation for this inactive flag is a bit more complicated, but ask your users how complicated you want to have it. I'm out, right? So it could be simple or super complicated. But that's easy to calculate now because you have all the flags from all the source systems available. Or what we typically do is we add the soft delete flag, the is deleted flag from your source system, also to the effectivity satellite, because it's also an indicator for the deletion or not. And it can jump back and forth again because they might delete the record, put it in the trash bin. They might get it out again, so it's active again in the source. They delete it again and then physically delete the record, right? So it goes back and forth, But the cool thing is the pit table gives you the current state of all these deltas at the time of the snapshot. So it's easy to calculate now. With all the deltas we have, what's the current perspective on this inactive flag or is deleted flag or whatever you want to call it? That's a cool thing. So that should answer those questions here. The last one, that's a tricky one because, so here, let me just read this again. How on the other hand would a purely virtualized dimension look like without PRT just on top of the hub and satellite views? All right, boy, that's a tough one because I haven't done it for a while. So typically, if you want to produce a type 2 dimension, let's assume that. Type 1 is easy. Type 1, you just select the business keys from the hub, left join into the satellites, into your effective satellites, for example. For the latest delta, that's the highest load date, right? Or so you go for maximum load date, or for your virtualized load end date, the open one, like in the type 1 satellites, as we call them. Version 1 satellites, where we calculate the load end date virtually using the lead or lag function. I can use that then. And then it's so then I have my data, and then I can essentially calculate my inactive flag in this case by retrieving the deletion timeline from the effective satellites I just joined. Essentially, easy. Type 1 is easy. Type 2 is a challenge because you have the timeline, right? And the easiest pattern is the pit table. That's what I personally use all the time. If you don't have a pit table, the best pattern is if you have a datetime dimension and use that as a basis, like a snapshot date, right? So you use the dim date or the ref date, actually, the ref date as a basis for your from statement. And then you have to identify what's the latest delta in each satellite, because all these effective satellites, but also your standard satellites, they deliver deltas whenever there's a change. And therefore, each source system delivers them at their own timeline. There's lots of gaps in between, right? These deltas are not aligned to each other. The alignment is done by the pit table. That's why it's so fast. It's all pre-aligned on the snapshot date, so it's fast. You can just inner join the data, done. If you don't have the pit table, you have to align it by yourself. And the trick is to use this complicated join pattern. When you load the pit table, you now have to apply on the fly in your view, which kind of, I mean, it's not efficient. So, but you have to join just like when we load the pit table with the in-between query, essentially, or the highest load date query kind of stuff, or the lag or lead function. You have to apply the join when joining the satellite to find the relevant delta, the most recent delta for your ref date entry. And then once you have aligned these deltas, then you can again calculate the inactive date essentially for the data here. That's the basic idea. I haven't done it for a while because it's super inefficient. Typically, we use pit tables for that. It's much more efficient to apply these window functions once while loading the pit, and then you just, when you query it, everything's aligned. So it's much faster essentially. So just add the effective satellites to the pit tables and you're done. That's the basic trick essentially. That's what I would strongly recommend for applying these timelines, and also for other timelines, right? We have a class. So you mentioned it, the information delivery class. There's another class on multi-temporal data vault solutions, and that's where we apply business timelines, like your valid from date, valid to date, the contract start and end date, and so on. And the basic trick is add them to the effective satellites and add the effective satellites to the pit table, because then we can leverage those timelines in our queries in a dimension or further downstream. That's what we typically recommend. So the trick is to add these satellites, these effective satellites to the pit table, just as any other satellite relevant for information delivery. You would add all of them to the pit table. Cool. Timing is okay. All right, here's the source code from the book. It's super simple. Here we have the pit table, and you just add the inner join to the effective satellite, which you added to the pit table beforehand. And then you can leverage those attributes not only from the data satellites, but also from the effective satellite, and then you're done. So it's super easy to apply afterwards. It's as easy as this code up here. There's no difference essentially. And then you either have the where condition extended, where you filter for only the active rows, based on the deletion date timeline, end of all times, that's the active rows, or where you calculate the inactive flag on the deletion timeline. Good. If you have a question like this, and so I should have brought up the code a bit earlier, but if you have a question like this, use this form behind this URL, sfr.ee/dbfriday. That's where you can submit your questions, upload a picture like this one, the scan. And if you are having other questions on more tools like WhereScape and DBT, check out scalefree.to/webinars. That's where you find the registration form for the monthly sessions on WhereScape and DBT, where our tool expert at Scalefree talk about that. I'm not a tool expert, to be honest. And then I know the tools to some extent, but I don't use them on a daily basis, essentially. And these guys use it daily, essentially. And if you can't wait until next Friday for the next question, check out the Data Innovators Exchange. And that's essentially a forum-style community where you can ask questions, and people from Europe and from Australia answering it. So it's like a 24-hour support because they're sitting in Australia on the other side of the globe, right? It's a at least they say it's a globe. I do believe it, and so it's 24-hour support. By the way, I'm personally next week on the Hannover Messe in Hanover. We have a booth there. Send me an email if you need to know the location. But if you happen to be in Hanover, if you can make it to the exhibition, come over with a booth and grab some merchandise, essentially. Cool. Thanks for joining, and see you hopefully next Friday, guys.